Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now let's begin. I remember this story vividly. It's stuck with me ever since. Every time I think about playing hide and seek in the dark or walking past an alleyway, it flashes back in my mind. It happened in the fall, at the start of October. My 3 siblings and I went to visit my mom at her apartment. I have a sister, Jess, and 2 brothers, Mike and Eli. Our parents had divorced 2 years earlier, and we didn't see Mom very often. So this visit was Dad's way of being a good parent, letting us spend time with her, even though he didn't have to. Mom's apartment was in the sketchy part of town. Lots of old buildings packed together, but somehow the place always felt empty. Her unit was right next to an alleyway that also served as a back entrance to the apartment complex. If you didn't know where to look, you'd never find it unless you drove down that long, dark alley. Her apartment was on the 2nd floor. We were always excited to visit because Mom's place felt warm and cozy, small but comforting like Grandma's house, with soft furniture and random decor scattered around. The neighbors downstairs were great too. We had made friends with them during a previous visit, a boy and a girl named Zach and Chi-Chi. Zach and I usually played in the parking lot beside the alleyway. Cops and robbers, tag, kickball, typical kid stuff. But that evening, since it was October and Halloween was coming up, Zach suggested we play hide and seek outside at night. Of course, my siblings wanted to join. We agreed to meet outside at 9 o'clock. By the time night fell, the air had that eerie October chill. The sky was dark, and the parking lot glowed under the tall lampposts, their light a rusty orange. It was the perfect spooky atmosphere. When the clock hit 9, we all slipped out of our rooms and gathered outside. Me, Zach, Chi-Chi, Jess, Mike, and Eli. As always, we chose the seeker with bubblegum in a dish. Zach ended up being it. The rest of us scattered into our hiding spots, staying within the complex boundaries but venturing just far enough to make it exciting. I ran off with Jess since she was the oldest and I always stuck close to her. We decided to hide behind the big garbage bins behind the apartment building. To get there, we had to walk down the long alleyway that stretched to the end of the building. It seemed perfect, far enough that no one would check. Zach shouted, "Ready or not, here I come." The game began. At first it was fun, but once the waiting set in, the excitement faded. The night grew quiet, with only distant sounds echoing through the alley. I started to get impatient, and so did Jess. "Maybe we hid too well," I whispered. She laughed softly and said, "Maybe we should just give up. It's getting late anyway." We began moving back toward the main area, stepping past the garbage bags and out into the middle of the alley. That's when my heart nearly stopped. At the far end of the alley stood a figure under the flickering alley light. It wasn't anyone I recognized. The person was tall, unnaturally tall, like they were wearing something to make themselves look bigger. The overhead light cast deep shadows over their face, but what stood out was their hair. It was an afro, bright and colorful, a clown wig. The realization hit me like ice water. It was a clown, and it wasn't even Halloween yet. Why would someone be dressed like that, standing silently in an alleyway? The clown didn't move. It just stared at us. Jess grabbed my arm and pulled me back. "Let's go. Now." We turned and hurried back down the alley, hoping to find the others. Luckily, we ran into Mike and Chi-Chi near the parking lot. Mike looked confused when he saw us. "Why are you just walking around? I thought you were still hiding," he said. We told him what we'd seen. The tall person dressed as a clown standing at the end of the alley. Mike frowned, and we all turned to show them. That's when things got worse. The clown was closer now, still staring at us and waving. We could see the face clearly under the light. The makeup wasn't normal. It was all black, as if they were trying to hide their features. The only visible details were the eyes. Just the eyes. And then Chi-Chi screamed. "There's another one," she shouted, pointing behind us. We spun around. She was right. Another clown stood there, this one with green hair and even longer legs. That was enough. We all ran. Chi-Chi bolted toward her apartment. Jess, Mike, and I raced upstairs to ours. When we got inside, Eli was already there talking to Mom. She pulled us into a hug immediately, tears in her eyes. For a second, I wondered if she somehow already knew. Then Eli explained what had happened to him. He'd been hiding in the courtyard behind a bush when he heard footsteps. He thought it was Zach, so he stayed hidden. Then he heard Zach's voice calling his name from a distance. That's when he realized the footsteps weren't Zach's. As he peeked up, he saw the shoes stop right in front of him. Slowly, he looked up and saw a clown staring directly down at him. Eli ran as fast as he could. He found Zach, who hadn't seen the clown yet, and together they ran to Zach's apartment to tell his parents. When we told Mom our side of the story, she was just thankful we were all safe. I wish the night ended there, but it didn't. Later that night, after everyone had fallen asleep, I woke up thirsty. I got out of bed to grab a bottle of water from the fridge. As I opened it, I heard a strange noise outside the window. Looking back, I know it was stupid, but I went to check. The sound was like tapping or knocking, which didn't make sense. Our apartment was on the second floor. When I lifted the blinds, my heart nearly stopped again. Right there, face to face with the window, was the clown. The same one Jess and I had seen. He was staring directly at me. I screamed and ran straight to Mom. She rushed out. But when we looked back, the window was empty. The clown was gone, like something straight out of a horror movie. But Mom believed me. She held me close and told me it was okay. Still, ever since that night, I've never played hide-and-seek in the dark again. And I'll always hate alleyways, because I'll never forget that clown. The story I am about to tell you happened when I was 11 years old and in 6th grade. The school I attended was right across the street from this beat-up old house that honestly terrified me as a kid. It looked so old, filthy, and abandoned that just passing by it made my skin crawl. I could never understand how anyone could live there and be okay with the way it looked from the outside. Whenever my friends and I walked past that house on our way home, they would always make jokes about it, laughing and teasing. I, on the other hand, would scold them, telling them that the owner probably wouldn't be too happy to see a bunch of middle schoolers mocking their home. Of course, my friends laughed at me instead, calling me scared and overly cautious. And honestly, they weren't wrong. I was a huge scaredy cat as a kid, always nervous about getting in trouble or seeing someone angry. At first, walking past that house wasn't too bad, but once October came and my friends started staying after school for their programs, things began to take a turn for the worse. It all started during the second week of October, the first time in a long while that I had to walk home alone. Like usual, I passed by that creepy old house, but this time, something felt different. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed someone standing still by one of the windows, staring directly at me as I walked past. It sent chills down my spine. I was terrified, but since nothing else happened, I tried to brush it off and keep going. However, it didn't stop there. Every day after that, as I walked home from school, that same figure was there in the window, standing completely still watching me. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, it was too far and too dark. But that didn't matter. The fact that someone was watching me every single day made me feel sick with fear. When I told my friends, they shrugged it off, saying maybe it was someone playing an early Halloween prank to scare me. I wanted to believe them, so I convinced myself I was just overreacting and being my usual scared self. Then, about a week before Halloween, things escalated. I was walking home alone again, and as I got close to that house, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was a tall silhouette standing on the porch, just standing there, facing me. I tried to act brave and keep walking, but as soon as I passed the house, the figure suddenly came rushing down the steps and started chasing me. I screamed as loud as I could and ran as fast as my legs would go, but it felt like no matter how hard I tried, he was getting closer. The person chasing me sounded like a man. He was yelling random things that made no sense, and his voice was filled with a kind of madness that terrified me even more. I knew I couldn't outrun him for long, so I darted into a nearby alley and hid behind a large dumpster that reeked horribly. My heart was pounding so fast I could barely breathe. I tried to stay completely still, praying he wouldn't find me. I heard his footsteps stop right outside the alley. He was mumbling to himself, getting closer and closer to where I was hiding. I could hear his breathing. loud and uneven, so close that I thought for sure he would see me any second. Then suddenly I heard the sound of footsteps running away. I stayed crouched there, frozen, until I was sure he was gone. Once I felt it was safe, I bolted out of the alley and sprinted all the way home. The moment I got inside, I told my parents everything that happened. My dad immediately called the police, and within 20 minutes they arrived at our house. They asked me to explain what happened in detail and to point out which house the man came from. After hearing my story, they said they would check it out and get back to us with an update the next day. True to their word, the police came back the following day, but what they told us made my stomach drop. They said no one had lived in that house for years. It had been completely vacant. According to them, it was probably a homeless man or a squatter staying there temporarily who, for whatever reason, decided to chase and scare me. That was it. No one was ever caught and nothing more was done about it. When I told my friends what happened, even they were shocked and couldn't believe it. And to this day, that experience has stuck with me. I'm 22 years old now, but every time I walk past a creepy or abandoned-looking house, I still feel that same fear all over again. That day will forever be burned into my memory. I grew up in a rural part of Poland, a place still deeply rooted in Christianity, where Halloween isn't widely celebrated. Many older people even consider it satanic, though nowadays, some folks decorate their porches with pumpkins, a few even carving them into jack-o'-lanterns. Back then, I had a routine of taking my dog Susie for a walk every evening. She's a large dog and doesn't get along well with kids or cyclists, so daytime walks were always a hassle. In the fall, it gets dark here fast, and by 8 p.m., it already feels like the middle of the night. That evening was no different. The sky pitch black except for the dim, flickering streetlights when I set out for our usual walk. There's a short road I always like to take, leading from the small village supermarket to a church nearby. It's only about a 10-minute walk, bordered by a dense forest on one side and a large horse stud on the other. At night, it's completely deserted. I always enjoyed the solitude, the crisp air, the sound of crunching leaves under my shoes, and that quiet, nostalgic feeling that comes with autumn. I was lost in those thoughts as I neared the end of the road, where the forest meets an old stable that once belonged to the parish priest. The place had been abandoned long before I was born. That's when Susie suddenly started barking like crazy. She lunged forward, growling and tugging hard on the leash. At first I thought maybe a cyclist or another dog was nearby, but then I realized her focus was fixed entirely on the stable and the trees behind it. The area was poorly lit, the old streetlights barely worked, and I could hardly see anything beyond the tree line. Still, something was definitely there. And then I saw it. Maybe 10 to 20 meters away behind the stable stood the silhouette of a man. At first I thought it was just a bush, but as I stared longer I could see it was definitely a person, motionless, kneeling, and wearing white. The moonlight reflected faintly off his clothes, revealing a white robe of some kind. He wasn't hiding, but he wasn't in plain sight either. Just there, watching. My stomach dropped. I pulled hard on Susie's leash, trying to get her to move, but she wouldn't budge. Panic rising, I grabbed her by the harness and dragged her along, walking fast but trying not to run. I didn't want whoever that was to know I'd seen him. Thankfully, the church was just up ahead and I could see a few people standing nearby. For a moment, I considered telling them what I'd seen. But what would I even say? That someone was kneeling by the trees in the dark? It sounded absurd. So I just kept walking, checking over my shoulder every few seconds to make sure no one was following us. Even Susie had stopped sniffing around. She just walked quickly and quietly beside me. When I finally got home, I thought it was over. But that night, I was woken up by the sound of sirens, multiple ones, wailing through the village for nearly half an hour. The next morning, I saw the news. The old priest's stable had burned down. People said it was probably local teenagers messing around or pulling a Halloween prank, but I knew what I saw. The person I'd seen wasn't some drunk kid. They were calm, deliberate, almost ritualistic. What unsettles me most is the time. I saw that figure hours before the fire started, at least 5 or 6. Were they kneeling there the entire time, waiting, praying, Planning? I still don't know. But I do know one thing. I'm thankful that night they didn't move, didn't follow, and that Susie didn't drag me closer. Because if those people were capable of setting a building on fire, I can't imagine what else they might have done. Last October, right after school, my friends and I decided to visit a nearby pumpkin patch. The air was cold and crisp, the ground blanketed with orange and yellow leaves that crunched under our feet. We had been looking forward to this trip all week. The patch itself was small but lively. Families were walking around, kids laughing, and running ahead of their parents, and the warm scent of baked goods drifted from a nearby stand. We parked the car, grabbed a small wagon, and started looking for pumpkins. There were rows upon rows of them, big, small, perfectly round, and oddly shaped ones scattered everywhere. Everything felt cheerful and normal. Then my friend Kevin, always the one to joke around, dared me to pick the biggest pumpkin at the far end of the patch, the one sitting close to a small wooded area. I laughed and agreed, not thinking much of it. The path leading there was narrow, and the further we walked, the quieter it got. The laughter and chatter from the main area faded until all I could hear was the wind rustling through the trees. The shadows stretched long across the ground as the sun dipped lower, and the air carried that eerie calm only late autumn evenings seemed to have. When we finally reached the back of the patch, I noticed something odd. Just behind the row of pumpkins near the trees stood what I first assumed was a scarecrow. It was tall, thin, and wore a hat, its arms stretched out like a cross. But the longer I looked, the more wrong it seemed. It was too slim to be a scarecrow. And the hat? It moved slightly like someone breathing underneath it. "Do you guys see that?" I whispered. Kevin glanced over and shrugged. "Probably just a decoration," he said casually. But something in my gut told me it wasn't. I quickly bent down, picked up the pumpkin, and tried to ignore the strange figure behind the trees. It didn't move. It just stood there. As we started walking back, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, and each time I swore the figure seemed closer, though it might have been my imagination. Kevin noticed me looking back and laughed, telling me to stop being paranoid. Still, my skin crawled. When we finally reached the edge of the pumpkin rows, I turned for one last look, and the figure was gone. A wave of relief washed over me, and I tried to convince myself it had just been a person walking or some Halloween prop I hadn't noticed before. We made our way toward the stand to pay for our pumpkins. The sun had nearly set now, and the path was darker, shadows blending together around the trees. Just as we were passing the wooded area again, I heard a sharp crack and the sound of a branch snapping. I froze. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Kevin shook his head, distracted. I slowly turned around, and my heart nearly stopped. The figure was back, standing about 10 feet behind us. This time its arms weren't stretched out. It was just standing there, facing us. Kevin noticed I'd stopped walking and asked what was wrong. Before I could answer, the figure tilted its head slowly like it was studying us. Then it began to move forward. Not walking, not stepping, gliding. It didn't even seem to touch the ground. Panic surged through me. I grabbed Kevin's arm and we ran. The wagon rattled behind us, pumpkins bouncing out as we sprinted toward the main area. I could hear leaves crunching, fast, too fast, like something was chasing us. When we finally reached the crowd, laughter and chatter filled the air again, and I turned to look back. The figure had stopped right at the edge of the pumpkin rows. It just stood there, motionless, watching. My chest felt tight as we paid for our pumpkins and hurried to the car. I didn't dare look back again until we were halfway home. On the drive, I asked Kevin to promise me he hadn't seen anyone back there. He said he didn't, that he had only seen pumpkins and trees, but I knew what I'd seen. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure. The way it tilted its head, the way it moved, the way it just watched. I tried convincing myself it was a prank or a creepy decoration, but that pumpkin patch was for families and kids. No one would put something like that there. A few days later, I read an online post about someone else seeing a strange person in a costume at that same pumpkin patch. It was around the same time, near the same wooded area. They said the figure didn't move or speak like a normal person. No names, no pictures, just the report. I haven't gone back to that patch since. But every October when the leaves start to fall and the air turns cold, I remember that figure, standing behind the trees, still silent and watching. And I cannot help but wonder what would have happened if it had followed us all the way to the car.